But because we're talking about next generation, I want to take a few minutes and give you just some of my wild ideas about what I think is going to happen next in terms of the social change efforts you guys need to be thinking about when it comes to messaging. And these are complete assumptions. We don't have much data yet. First, stories will become increasingly experiential. They will be even more immersive. And Amber's going to talk a little bit about the technology that is going to completely blow away the way we think about telling stories and the way we immerse people at just unimaginable. And it's going to happen in the next year or two, and that's going to be incredible. Every story is going to have to start doing that. Secondly, I think it's important that we stop for a minute and ask, who is our audience? We talked about a new generation of resiliency. And most of the time we have a tendency at conferences like this to talk about the millennials. I have news for you. Thank goodness, the millennials are finally old hat. They're old school. The ones that aren't living in their parents' basement have actually gotten married, had children, and bought their first house. Now, many of them still are going to need this message. There's no question about that. But you need to also start thinking about how you're going to shape messages for the generations that have come after them that are already here. And by some people's definitions, we're talking 2 generations past the millennials. Generation Alpha, people who were born in 2010 who are starting school this year. And that's really important because they are the first true digital natives. And I know you've heard this term thrown around for a long time now, for the last 20 or 30 years. This is the generation that it really applies to. They were born the same year as the iPad was introduced. And you have seen them. They are weaned on the screen. Those great videos on YouTube with the little baby that's, a year old and they're completely able to navigate an iPad but completely flustered when you give them a magazine because when they bang on it, nothing happens. They are going to communicate, learn, and think completely differently. And that means if we're going to reach them, we need to be telling stories in a completely different way. They value authenticity over authority. If you don't recognize the people in this photograph, you need to find out who they are. This is a generation have completely rejected the idea that somebody with more wisdom, more education, more experience knows more than they do. They turn to their friends for product recommendations and who they're going to date. They go to Wikipedia when they want to find the answer to something. They have completely rejected all of the institutions, including education, as the place to find the answers. Unfortunately, they've got a pretty good reason for doing that. They have been let down in many cases. That's a challenge for all of you who represent institutions and organizations, because you do know more than they do. But the question is, how are you going to get through that barrier and make it clear to them that you have authentic information, not information just to sell them? They make their own stories. Whether it's creating crafts that they're selling on Etsy online, whether it's repurposing all of the IP for major companies like, Disney. They take characters that exist out there that they love, and they turn them into stories that are relevant to them, that are about their life. And that is an important trend that you guys need to be aware of and think about how you relate to that going forward. Oh yeah, and they share these stories in a way that nobody else ever has before. 300 hours of new YouTube videos uploaded every minute. The young people in that bottom image down there, they're the top 10 revenue generators on YouTube. You notice none of them are as old as I am. In fact, they're getting younger and younger, and they are creating their own stories by remixing the information that we give to them. They are members of virtual tribes. Now, this is one of the biggest misconceptions all of us old people have about the youth. We see them with their cell phones and their screens, and we think they're antisocial, we think they're unable to engage with other people, and they're totally wrapped up in this digital world. They're not. They're talking to their friends. They're playing with their friends. They're planning with their friends. They're engaging with their friends. And they expect you to tailor all of your messages for their tribe. And don't expect them to tell you what that means. You have to figure out how to do that. You have to understand what their preferences are, what their needs and their wants are. And that's the only way they're going to listen to you and not to the other people around them. But they suffer a serious empowerment gap. And that's really important for all of us who want to create change. You see, members of this new generation believe completely in their individual ability to craft their reality. They're so used to having everything personalized for them. They know how to get what they want, when they want it, where they want it. But they don't understand their ability as a larger group to actually create change. They don't know how communities do that. They've never been taught that. I saw this really demonstrated incredibly powerful last year. I was in Vancouver doing another project on nuclear disarmament. And I had a young woman, she was 20 at the time, and she said to me, "I don't understand what this has to do with me. I know how to solve climate change, I just recycle my bottles." but I don't understand how to solve this bigger issue. And that's really going to be critical for all of you who are thinking about getting real social change in the future, is how do you cover that empowerment gap? So finally, this is what it comes down to. This is your challenge. How do we give them the tools to make themselves the heroes of their own stories? Because we know now from research that if we make them heroes, we actually do get the action that we want. We get the change that all of you are working so incredibly hard to create.